In the previous section, we have discussed extensively on props, components, and how they are associated with each other. In this section, we are going to look at another way to create components in React. To start with, there are quite a few ways to create components in React. Number of ways of creating it doesn't really matter. All you need to know is, broadly, there are two types of components. One is a functional component and the other is class component. But semantically, both are components. It means they should eventually return some React element for sure. Okay, our component function here is a functional component. A functional component is simply a JavaScript function that returns some React element. It means it can accept props as its argument through which we send data from outside to the component. They are sometimes called as presentational or dumb components because these components just returns how its view should be like when it gets rendered to the DOM. They can't have any logic to make a network request or database query, etc. You don't need to worry about these terminologies right now. As we develop the applications in this course, we will gradually understand these concepts as per the requirement and see how all the pieces fit together. Okay, and the other type of components are class components. Firstly, what is the need for class components if we already have functional components? And the reason is, functional components are very trivial and they can do only one thing, that is, to accept props as argument and return some JSX or indeed React element. That's all. Suppose if we want to make a network request inside our component and use its response to update our UI, we can't do it inside a functional component. But web applications are quite interactive. So we should be able to support all kinds of user interactions, processing responses from network requests and updating our UI accordingly, all these kinds of things. In order to make our React applications interactive, we need to maintain some kind of state that can be associated within our component, which stores the private data inside it and can change over the time, unlike props. Being set outside and passed to the component as an argument, props come with a restriction that our component should not modify the props data inside it. So our functional components are kind of ineffective in creating interactive React applications. They can only do some limited stuff. There comes the class component to the rescue in order to make our React applications interactive. It allows us to do things more than just accepting read-only or immutable props. It can manage internal data of our component inside state. We can also make network requests inside the class component and it provides triggers to update the UI also. There's so much more that we can do inside a class component which we will gradually see. Okay, we will create our first class-based component which does the exact same thing as of our functional component here. Firstly, let's remove some no longer needed code to make our file a bit cleaner. I'm going to remove all the commented portions. Then let's remove the h2 React element. And finally, let's pass a single component React element to the render method. Okay, let's save it and check the output on browser. Okay, everything is fine and we are good to go. Alright, there are two ways to create our class-based components. One is using React library's create class method and other using ES6 class syntax. Though ES6 class syntax is the recommended way to create class components, we will demonstrate the usage of create class first, as it is the traditional way to create them and you can find many blogs, tutorials and legacy code written using create class method. In fact, in our shows app, firstly we will create all the class-based components using create class and develop the whole application. And later, when we discuss about ES6 classes, we will refactor our shows app to contain class components created using ES6 classes. And from the next app onwards, we will directly start using ES6 class to build our class-based components. Okay, one quick note here. React.create class is a traditional way to create class-based components in React. But from version 15.5, React gives a deprecation warning when we use it, saying that it will be removed from version 16. And as a replacement to it, React team has created a separate NPM package called create React class, which we can use to create class components. So I'm gonna use create React class package instead of React.create class method. But syntactically and semantically, there won't be any change between the two methods. It's just that since create class method will be removed from version 16 of React, it's been created as a separate NPM package to provide backward compatibility to those who are using React.create class and not ready to migrate to ES6 classes just yet. So first thing that we are gonna do is to refactor the functional component to class-based component. In order to do that, we will install npm package create React class. So I will flip over to the terminal and inside my projects directory, I will type npm I, which is shorthand for install, and dash capital S for dash dash save, and name of the package, which is create react class, and let's hit enter. Okay, it's been successfully installed. Let's head back to the code editor and let's import the package at top. So I'm gonna say where create class equal to require create react class. Okay, we can give it any name here, like create react class, react create class, anything. But I named it as create class just to keep it uniform with react.createClass method name. Okay, let's comment out our functional component code here. We are going to create a class component that produces the same output as of our functional component. Let's define our class component using createClass method that we imported above. So I'm gonna write where component equal to, let's call createClass method. Okay. CreateClass method accepts an object as its argument and returns the constructed component. So let's put an object as its argument. For now, it's an empty object. Alright, one thing to note here, whatever the type of component it is, be it a functional component or a class component, the way of writing it in JSX remains the same. Or creating an element out of component remains the same. So we don't need to change anything over here. Okay. Before we make it working, we are going to wantedly do a few mistakes. Then we will analyze and understand the errors before we finally fix them. I want you to make a bit familiar on some possible errors we might face while working with class components. So rather than writing the perfect working code right from the start, it's better to make some errors and learn from them. Believe me, understanding errors throws us a lot of insight into the internal concepts in any domain. Okay, let's save it and let's head over to the browser. And we got an error which says create class specification must implement a render method. Okay. Inside the argument object, it expects a special property method render being defined, without which our app throws the error saying we forgot to implement render method inside the class component. So let's define a render method inside our object. Okay, do note as of now we haven't returned anything from it. Let's save the file and check the output on browser. And we got another error which says React composite component dot render, means inside render method a valid React element or null must be returned. You may have returned undefined, an array, or some other invalid object. Looking at the error, you might have guessed already what we are missing. We are missing the fundamental thing that a component should follow. That is, it has to return some JSX. In other words, some React element. And there is also a warning from Create React app conveying the same. Your render method should have return statement. Okay. In our case, we didn't return anything from the render method. So we are essentially returning undefined from it. And that's what the error message is conveying. A React component must only return either a valid React element or null, but not undefined. We will discuss when components will return null later in the course. And from version 16 of React, we can also return arrays from the class components render method or from functional components. Okay. Next question you may get can be, why only React expects to return some JSX from render method? The reason being, since the argument to create class is an object and we can define several properties inside it, there should be a unique way for React in order to fetch JSX from our class component. That's why React offers us this special method called render. Only the JSX code that we return from render method will contribute to the view and gets displayed on the UI. Also, keep in mind, this is one of the frequent errors you may encounter while you are developing React apps. Render method must return correct or valid React element. Otherwise, React is going to throw this error. There are several sources for this error. You might have accidentally written incorrect JSX syntax or forgot to return the JSX, which we did in our case, are some of the reasons for this error. So whenever you get this error, you can immediately look at your component's render method and you would probably find the mistake inside it. Okay, now that we have found the reason for error, let's fix it by returning some JSX from the render method. So I'm gonna copy the return statement inside functional component and paste the same inside render method. Let's uncomment it. Okay, let's save and check the output on browser this time. And yet again we got another error, which is at line number 15 props is not defined. Also at line number 16 inside index.js file. Since we are inside a class component, props object is stored in its instance this. So we have to refer props using this object. That's why to fix this error, we have to write this.props wherever we are accessing props. Okay, let's save now and check the output. And this time we got the expected output, which is hello world heading on web page. So we have successfully created our class component and rendered it on the UI. Okay, so far so good. But we haven't done anything extra that we couldn't do with functional component. Also, we haven't had any data inside our component that changes over time. But application UIs are dynamic and can change over time. So in the next section, I'm going to introduce a new concept called state inside our class component. Alright, let's continue.